This podcast represents my opinions and the opinions of my guests. This is not medical advice, and I'm not establishing a physician-patient relationship with any listener. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each person is so unique, please consult with your healthcare professional for any medical questions that you may have. Hello, everybody. This is not Vanessa's voice. Vanessa is actually going to be on the receiving ends of my questions. This is Dr. Charles Tadros. This is the Not Your Doc podcast. This is our 6th session.
Yeah, 6.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another gorgeous day here in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. Vanessa, thank you for agreeing to do this. Actually, you volunteered.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate people throwing themselves on the sword to further our progress here.
I hope it's not subjecting people to too much.
No,
we'll try
absolutely
to
not.
Avoid that.
I've been a physician for 30 years, and Vanessa, and I've been part of the ketamine clinic. I co-founded it about 6 years ago with Dr. Frugi. And Vanessa, early on, and I don't remember when, was one of our clients, one of our patients.
2017.
Okay, so we started in
Really
2016.
early.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so Vanessa was early on when we still were newbies with our ketamine clinic. And so Vanessa's agreed to talk about some of her life experiences that led her to potentially benefiting from ketamine. Mm-hmm. And things have turned out fairly well. She's come to hang out with us, to work with us, to help take care of more patients like her. And so it's a true pleasure to be able to work with somebody who's not only bright but also knowledgeable. Vanessa,
thank you.
You want to? I normally do kind of an interview with patients as if I were consulting with them on starting ketamine. But do you want just to start us with your story?
Yeah, sure. So, gosh, my story. That's a big open thing.
Sure.
So basically, I was born and raised here in St. Louis. I was born at the Baby Palace on Ballas, big St. John's. My parents are actually transplants from the East Coast. They're from Long Island, New York, and they moved here about a year before I was born. And so super happy family, great 2 married parents. When I was about 5 years old or so, my parents joined a church, and that's been really wonderful for them and really transformed and brought a lot of good things to their lives.
Yes.
As a kid, I was really smart and precocious and, talkative, kind of a know-it-all. But in general, I kind of liked myself. Like I thought I was okay. I had friends, but I was also teased, so let's see. In middle school, we moved to Springfield, Missouri, to actually, help plant another location of the same church that we were affiliated with in Springfield, Missouri. And so, during that time, it was really just me and my brother. There weren't a lot of other kids in the church. And so, it was all, friends at school, and I got to be a lot more independent, I would say, for the first time. So the upbringing in the church, I would describe it like it was a very emotionally intense upbringing. Mm-hmm. A lot of good and positive things, but also a lot of rules and a lot of kind of black and white teaching about, what's right and what's wrong, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Mm-hmm. And, I think I definitely had kind of a tendency as a child and as a person toward perfectionism, but also, being raised in kind of this, in this tradition that really encourages perfectionism and to strive for perfection and to strive towards righteousness and goodness and obedience. That really occupied all of the space in my brain. And, so I had really, really high expectations of myself. Anyway, am I
Yeah,
am I
no,
reading
it's
the
fine.
information you want?
This happened to be is this evangelical?
Yeah, evangelical Christian. Yeah, so
Gotcha.
definitely describe it as that, non-denominational.
And whenever people talk about evangelical and non-denominational, can you tell? I know a little bit, but would you tell me how you see them? Define
So
them?
basically, the type of non-denominational Christianity our church practices was sort of an offshoot of Churches of Christ, traditional Churches of Christ. So not Catholic, and not affiliated with other denominations either. So not Baptist, not Presbyterian. I would say we came out of the Reformation movement, if you want to put it that way.
Okay.
And the highest priority was on, living our lives in accordance to what the Bible says.
This is doing good works, being a good person, doing good works in order to get closer to God, closer to Christ.
Yeah,
That's
basically, yeah. So the goal was to live like Jesus and to model our lives, after how Jesus would behave. And the Bible is full of commandments, right? About
Sure.
how respecting people, loving people, giving, not being prideful. And so when we were I keep saying we, my brother and I. We're, in this together. There was lots of instruction, not just on as a kid on how what's good behavior, but what is good behavior was sort of defined and reinforced by what the Bible says and
Yes.
what the expectations of our behavior were from the church. So, for some kids that worked out really well for them. For me, it felt really pretty heavy. Like the stakes were extremely high for, stepping out of line or.
When would you say that you kind of started feeling that burden of being closer to perfection or trying to achieve perfection? When do you think you noticed it as a youngster?
I think I was around 10 or 11 years old, probably, when I really started to look at my behavior and identify it as sinful. So if I got in an argument with my brother, I knew that it was sinful to fight with him or to not be loving towards him. And if I was disrespectful to my parents, I knew that I was breaking a commandment by not honoring them.
And how do you redeem yourself when you do break a commandment or whenever you're not as good as you could be or as perfect as you should be?
Yeah, so I mean, it was, confession to God and apologizing to him for my sin, apologizing to the people that I sinned against. And then in our faith tradition, basically you had to be baptized when you were of an age old enough to be able to understand sin and be able to commit your life to, following Jesus. That was kind of like the point of salvation. So a way that it was explained to me was kind of like all of those sins as a younger person before I got baptized kind of like stacked up against me, and I had to get baptized in order for that slate to be wiped clean.
I see.
Yeah.
And you started with kind of your upbringing and your faith and your family's faith because you see it as linked to what happened next.
Yeah, so we were living in Springfield, Missouri, and I was very, very close with a lot of the campus students that were part of our church. Like the church was met on it was called SMS at the time, but Missouri State University. We met on their campus, and there were a lot. The campus ministry was a really important part of the church, and my closest peers in age were not the 10-year-olds below me. It was the 18, 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds in the campus ministry. So I spent a lot of time building relationships with those kids and spending time with them. I say kids now. They seemed like totally grown adults to me when I was 13, 14 years old.
And you used the buildings there, or you shared buildings there? Or?
Yeah, we would meet at the student union and various, meeting rooms. But I was spending a lot of time with those students, and so I had, ride in cars with them and go to sleepovers and hang out with them. And so there was definitely, I think my parents had a really high level of trust in that group as well too. Yeah. So, when I was 13 or so, the person who was leading the campus ministry at the time decided to abuse me sexually over a few occasions. And that completely rocked my world. It was very, very confusing, very, very frightening. And certainly it did not compute with what I expected or what I wanted to experience or thought I would experience in the church. Obviously, bringing that to my parents, it was almost like unbelievable, So
yeah, there's no framework. There's nothing that readies anybody for something that happens like this, especially whenever you're 13.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, but you were able to go straight. How long did it take for you to go to your parents?
You know what? Actually, I pretty much went straight to them. I guess it was like the third or fourth occasion, and then I told my mom, I was like, "This is happening," and she was like, "What?" Yeah. And it was, so. Now, looking back, as an adult looking back on it now, I totally understand like why my parents were so confused and why they thought I might have been confused with what had happened. But I was definitely not confused about what happened, and it was definitely abuse and non-consensual and wrong.
And so many people, it sometimes takes them decades to understand what happened to them, to actually see it in adult eyes and be able to name it and actually finally be able to get help. And it's typically years, if not decades later. What do you think allowed you to be so readily open to talk to your parents? And those are the first people you went to.
Yeah, those are the first people I told for sure. I think, along with, with my upbringing in the church, I had a really intense sense of right and wrong.
Yes.
And this completely violated my understanding of what love looks like, what Christianity looks like. I knew Jesus would never treat me this way. So for someone who represented themselves to be a leader, I was so angry and indignant. And I think that's what just, and I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't done anything to ask for it or suggest it would be okay or anything like that. So I was 13, so I guess I was just old enough to really have a grasp on that.
And you know this, and the rest of us know this now that we're adults and in the health profession. A lot of people believe it is their fault, or at least the perpetrator told them it was their fault, or they caused it, or they led that person to act in that way. For sure. And you had your sense of your ability to talk to your parents, your sense of right and wrong, and you're feeling not guilty that it was anything. It was not triggered by you, it was not condoned by you. It was a humongous different than what we typically see in people who've been sexually molested. Yeah. So
I think there was a lot of that. I mean, the emotions were very confusing and very mixed, right? Like, I did feel like it was my fault, and I constantly was thinking about what I could have done differently. But at the same time, I just knew fundamentally that it was, just on its face wrong, and that it wouldn't really have mattered if I had done anything differently.
Yeah. How did your parents respond?
They listened. They were kind of confused at first, and trying to make sure that I was sure about, what happened. And, but they, pretty much right after that, they, reached out to church leadership, and, that escalated to them, confronting the guy, and, he admitted it to my dad in front of the church leader. And then, my parents got more advice, and they decided to get law enforcement involved.
Yes.
And that was going through that whole process was pretty traumatizing and kind of a story for another podcast. But it was, it stretched on the legal process for that. I was 13 when it happened. The trial and sentencing didn't happen until the end of my junior year in high school. So I was 17 at that time. Yeah. So, which all of that turmoil coincides with, the emergence of my mental health issues for sure. Yeah.
This is dramatic. And that a lot of people who've been sexually assaulted never face, never confront, never ask for legal help, et cetera. Yeah. And don't go to court, et cetera. So it's a totally different track than you took. But tell me, just jumping ahead, you think that it was important that you spoke up? It's important that you went through the legal system?
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it now, I did feel vindicated.
Yes.
You know, I did have to testify in front of my abuser multiple times. My parents were not allowed to be in the room with me. I did have to be cross-examined by his horrible, disgusting lawyer.
Yes.
I did have to listen to him testify that I provoked it and was being suggestive or whatever. And that was, you know, incredibly traumatizing, but miraculously, literally miraculously. And that it was a moment where I felt like, you know, okay, I think maybe God is with me on this, that so the defendant decided to do a bench trial instead of a jury trial. He thought he would have a better chance of being found not guilty in front of a judge than in front of a jury. So typically after the judge hears a case like this, they take the case under advisement before they issue a verdict.
Yes.
And the judge actually didn't take it under advisement. He actually ruled from the bench right then and there.
Yeah.
And he said, you know, the facts in this case speak for themselves. It is very clear to see who was lying and who was telling the truth in this situation. I don't remember a lot more verbatim what he said, but that was definitely the gist of it. And then he sentenced him to 7 years.
Yes.
Obviously, you know, that he didn't end up serving all of that, but still it was a triumphant moment for me, even though there was still a lot of wreckage and damage from, you know, the whole process. But I do ultimately feel proud that I went through that and really grateful for how my family and friends supported me through it so that I could be strong enough to survive it.
And horrific for any age, but for how it turned out as best as it could have
Absolutely.
turned out.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I couldn't have asked for a better outcome. Yeah.
Tell me what other mental health issues besides this by itself would be a lifetime's worth of trauma?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I mean, pretty much immediately, you know, my parents were trying to get me connected. There's like a victim support services in Springfield, Missouri that had, you know, counselors for children. I was, you know, an adolescent at this time, so like 13, 14.
Yes.
They had counselors to talk to, social workers. I did, you know, some trauma therapy at that time. Things were kind of okay for me for that next year that we lived in Springfield. So it all happened I was 13, like in 7th grade, and then in 8th grade, you know, I still was doing great in school and, you know, had friends and everything. I had my own boyfriends that year for the first time, which was like a huge shock, I think, for my parents that, you know, not people that we went to church with, and that was kind of not condoned, all that kind of stuff. But in general, I was kind of able to hold it together. And then we moved back to St. Louis in the summer between 8th and 9th grade. So 9th grade was okay. Again, had a boyfriend. Parents weren't happy with it. And then really it was my sophomore year where I was like, you know, I've always been an extremely high-achieving perfectionist. I took every single honors class. I did, you know, orchestra and choir and drama, debate, extracurricular activities. It was just like everything all at once. And so I guess it was really you know, after the winter break of my sophomore year in high school where I just like spent a month in bed and couldn't get out of bed. And so that's when I first saw a psychiatrist. And yeah.
I want to just deviate. I want to come back to kind of where you left off just now. One of the signs and symptoms we see in youngsters is behavioral changes whenever some sort of trauma, doesn't have to be sexual, some sort of trauma, behavioral changes, changes in grades, changes in hygiene, changes in friendships, irritability, anger. So a bunch of different things that look like oppositional and defiant.
Yes.
And some people will attribute it to drugs or something else. Oftentimes start with some sort of trauma, and other things are added on top of it, but that's what we end up seeing. The parents don't know what to do, or they're exhausted.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you got the appropriate help for the appropriate time. Did you recognize that you were having a hard time as soon as everything collapsed from going 100 miles an hour to not being able to get out of bed? Did you know something?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. There was this, like, there was this rupture that happened sort of like after like what happened to me with the abuse, that I suddenly felt like I said before that I liked myself. Like when I was a kid, I liked myself. And then this switch flipped where all of a sudden I was like, I'm a mess. I'm a complete aberration. Like I cannot meet my parents' expectations of me. I can't meet my own expectations of myself. I like, how could God ever love me because I'm such a mess and keep sinning? And
Yes.
so, I mean, I didn't know enough about, trauma responses and mental illness to be like, oh, this might be depression or something more.
Yes.
And so I very much internalized it as self-hatred.
Yes.
Yeah.
People forget that you start off with one or two problems earlier in life, whatever, ADD or anxiety or trauma or parents breaking up or sick relative that lives with you, and everybody has to take care of them, and then it compounds over time, sometimes years. So sometimes you can't make the connection between the start and what's happening today. Were you still was your family, or were you still part of the church or going to the church when you were in Springfield and then back in St. Louis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Important part of your stability for your family, the glue that helps.
Completely. I think if memory serves me correctly, I think we took a little bit of a break from Springfield, or at least I didn't have to go for a little while, which was really good because it was such a small, close-knit group of people, and there was, a certain faction or whatever that sided with my abuser, so that would have been really totally re-traumatizing to have to be subjected to that. But as soon as we moved back to St. Louis, right back into the teen ministry, right back into, being at church here in St. Louis, and and so all of the, kind of those, the parenting choices that came out of, having a pretty, I don't want to say rigid, but relatively strict, set of expectations of behaviors. Like I was bumping up against all of that, in addition to going through trauma and also just being a teenager.
Yes. And
having a developing brain.
Yeah, we forget that normal teen, even the best of teen years are look hectic from the outside and maybe feel hectic from inside the youngster's mind. But it's sometimes hard to differentiate what's normal, pulling away from family and hanging out more with friends, and versus signs of depression or something else going on. Yeah.
And it was, and on top of that too, there was just always that. I was a perfectionist and a people pleaser. I desperately wanted my parents' approval, and I desperately wanted the church's approval, and which I thought reflected God's approval of me. And I just felt like I was, just never, ever, ever going to see that again, And so I was going through these cycles of just like, okay, screw it. I don't need their approval, and I don't need any of this stuff. So then I would like act however I wanted, which was all pretty much within the normal range of normal teenage behavior. Right. But then it would the pendulum would swing the opposite way, and I go to church camp for the summer, for example, or have some sort of intensive talk with, a mentor at church, and then I would fall to pieces, with guilt and shame and kind of brokenness, that would make me want to just okay, I'm going to repent of everything and change everything and go back to being very, very devout and doing all the right things. And then as soon as I would mess up and find that wasn't sustainable, then the pendulum would start swinging back in the opposite direction. So it was really chaotic.
Yeah, we see that swinging between I promise, I promise to stop whatever or start whatever, and swinging it all the way, dramatic changes, not small incremental change, but dramatic, which are hard to maintain, hard to achieve, and hard to maintain. But did you end up seeing? Did your faith at that time allow you to see physicians, mental health professionals? And when did you start some trauma recovery, or eventually for the depression?
Yeah, so the trauma recovery mainly happened within the first year or so when we were first living in Springfield. When we first moved to St. Louis, my parents connected me with a Christian counselor, and I remember she was very nice, but I just remember finding it completely unhelpful, especially because there was all this complex emotion going on within me that was like, okay, if God loves me and I do the right things to serve him and I follow the rules of the Bible, like, why would he let this horrible thing happen to me? It was difficult for me to trust her approach to how I should work through some of these issues.
How bad things happen to good people.
Right. But then, after not being able to get out of bed and go to school, then I saw a psychiatrist that another family's kid in the church was also seeing as well. And so I got a depression diagnosis at that point. I was 16 and they started me on Lexapro.
No other diagnoses at that time.
No other diagnoses at that time. Yeah.
Jumping back, do you remember what the trauma? So we can describe it. There are many different techniques for trauma recovery, memory reconsolidation. Do you remember what it was like the trauma recovery? There was like techniques or
there was a workbook that I went through. It was like, I don't know, it was this big, thick, yellow workbook. And so I guess it was kind of modeled on like dialectical behavioral therapy.
Okay.
So lots of writing prompts, lots of identifying what sensations I was feeling. I was having panic attacks at the time. So identifying those things and journaling, those are the major things. It's a little bit fuzzy at this point what the specifics were.
It's interesting to give a big, thick book to somebody who was 13 at the time, that's homework and for journaling.
There was definitely not a lot of integration, between the stuff I was doing in that book and the things I actually talked about with a therapist.
So we should talk about that. Dialectical behavioral therapy is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. Initially, it was for personality disorders, but borderline personality disorder treatments. But it can be used for other diagnoses. And integration is the ability to bring together in this case, thoughts, feelings, sensations, to integrate them together into something that makes sense to you as a patient, as a client, and helps you progress, help you understand where you are and what happened, and helps you progress. Yeah,
for sure.
Did the Lexapro work?
The Lexapro worked amazingly for like a year.
And what did you notice? What was happening that showed that it was working for you?
My energy was restored. I was much less irritable. The irritability was one of the scariest and most frustrating things for me because I would be, from one minute to the next, I would just lash out at my parents and say something horrible and be angry. And then the next minute I would just like dissolve into a puddle crying because I felt so guilty and horrible that I had behaved that way and that I hurt them. And so it really helped with the irritability and with my ability to sleep and not feeling like I had to just sleep solid for weeks. So I mean, it was really effective at first.
You had lots of what we call vegetative symptoms that you didn't want. You lost energy. You lost interest in things.
For sure. It was really difficult for me to go to school. I just dreaded going to school.
Tearful in the morning type stuff.
Absolutely, all of that.
And hard to get motivated for anything, even responsibility, even fun things like going out with friends and things like that. So you had practically all this. Did you have weight changes?
No weight changes at the time.
Okay. Were you? This is something we use. We ask youngsters. Were you self-mutilating, cutting? Were you having any eating issues?
I had been cutting some in. That started in Springfield, I think, and it was kind of continuing on and off through high school. Yeah.
Any eating, body image or eating issues?
Not then, no.
Okay. We should define cutting or it's a terrible word, self-mutilation.
Yeah, self-mutilation for sure.
Is cutting. And I want to make sure nothing traumatizes you, re-traumatize you. What was cutting? How was it? What did you use? What's the feeling that led you to reaching for cutting?
Yeah, absolutely. So I snuck a little razor blade from my dad's workbench and I would literally sterilize it with alcohol before I used it. I mean, I was very a rule follower, perfectionist, very fastidious about the way that I did it. But, I would just make these like little superficial cuts kind of in the same spot under my watch line on my left hand or left arm. It gave me a sense of release from what felt like an unbearable amount of internal pressure, internal emotional pressure, and also a little bit of control. Like if I was going to experience pain or bleed, I was going to be the one to do it to myself. No one else was going to make me go through that. So it was kind of an exercise in reclaiming control.
Because
it was dysfunctional, but it that's how it helped me, you know.
I want to, because people listening sometimes misinterpret what we're saying. So cutting or self-mutilation, people can pick, people can scratch, people can hit their heads, bang their heads, all forms of self-harm. And typically, it's not because people are trying to commit suicide.
Correct.
They may be suicidal, but that's not the way that they're trying to achieve it. It's a type of internal tension that needs to go somewhere, and you can release it through any of these some of these techniques. The problem is it doesn't release it and it goes away and it stays away. It unfortunately reinforces the feedback loop in terms of any tension. This could be with eating disorder, or it could be with cutting. That any tension you could control and release that tension through self-manipulation, whether it's self-harm or eating or binging and purging, etc. So people sometimes others who look at it sometimes are shocked, they're afraid, they call 911, they go to the emergency room, and sometimes it's interpreted as trying to commit suicide.
Correct.
But typically it's not. I don't want to mislead anybody, but typically it's not. But it's something that needs to be addressed appropriately and aggressively. We see it in everybody from people who are depressed, people who are anxious, people with OCD, people who have been traumatized. So we see it in people who have eating disorders. So we see that overlap. We tend to see it more with women, young women than men. But actually, in the last few years, we've seen it actually with men too. So it's for people not to freak out, but to seek immediate help.
Yeah, absolutely.
So good.
I should say too that some of these, I guess this was like during the early 2000s. Some of these behaviors were kind of glorified on like early social media platforms.
I did not know. Yeah.
So like MySpace and Zanga, there's sort of like these like cutting groups basically where people would just like, it wasn't pictures yet. These were like, like text posts about talking about it and songs about it, that kind of stuff. So it wasn't like, I guess that's how I sort of knew about the behavior as an option. But I mean, yeah, even with early social media, some of that stuff was available then, yeah. And
that's always a question. If we put somebody with intensive outpatient or inpatient, if we house people who are depressed together, do they improve each other or don't? If people are suicidal, you house them together or you have them in group together. Do they reinforce, or same thing with drinking and drugs? If you house them with other people who have drinking or drug related issues, and so that's always a challenge to say, oh my gosh, this seems to be reinforcing the behavior rather than helping it because they're group with other people that do have the same behaviors, same diseases, same diagnoses. So what happened? So Lexapro, and tell me, if you can, and we'll never be able to summarize all the important factors for your life, but I want to make sure that we hit the high points that led you to, eventually here with us.
Yeah. So, I mean, so I guess it was the next year, so it worked from like middle of sophomore year to like really wasn't helping at all by the middle of junior year of high school.
You were taking it regularly.
I was taking it absolutely regularly every single day.
Not using substance like pot or
nothing
alcohol.
Else. No, nothing else.
Sometimes we call that SSRI poop out.
Yeah. I occasionally did drink when I was able to lie my way into getting to a party, but it wasn't something regular I was doing. But yeah, so I mean, in that junior year, that was kind of like culminating with the trial and, just everything going on. The Lexapro not helping anymore. I actually had a suicide attempt that December.
Yes.
And then, started a long process of trying different drugs then after that. Yeah. So I was inpatient for a while at St. Luke's, I think. Inpatient,
often, especially if you're at any age, but certainly if you're a youngster, It's kind of scary. It's kind of scary stuff.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
Yeah.
It was for sure terrifying.
Yeah.
And I mean, and when I had to do it again a few years later, even as an adult, it was also terrifying then
Yes.
too. Yeah.
The process, unfortunately, modern psychiatry is still an old-fashioned process of trial and error
Yeah.
with medications and mixing and matching medications, mixing and matching doses. The physician listens for signs and symptoms and tries to pick a drug that take care of those with the right type of adverse side effects or adverse effects. So if you're losing weight, you can't sleep, they could
Right.
pick something that helps with depression and helps you gain weight and helps you sleep. So there's a mix and match, but it's still an art. There's some science, but still lots of art. I know people talk about all sorts of fancy testing, genomic testing,
Right.
pharmacogenomic testing, and brain scans of different varieties. And none of them are probably as good as a good history and physical and somebody who knows you from mental health practitioner who knows you, a psychiatrist or psychotherapist.
Absolutely.
So how did the different medicines, we won't go over all of them,
Yeah.
did they work for a little bit, never worked?
Yeah. So I guess in that time period, I guess I was like turning 17. The psychiatrist I had been seeing I think he became ill and I had to switch to someone else anyway. But so I switched to this new psychiatrist who is, he's actually still my psychiatrist now.
Okay, wonderful.
But he was an absolute technician with medicines. And that was like, he helped me buy in to the belief that there is a combination of things out there that's going to help you feel better.
Yes.
So I trusted him to take me on that journey.
Yes.
We tried old drugs, old tricyclics. I was on Zyprexa. I was on, trazodone. We tried brand new drugs, name brand things that, I needed, coupons for to pay.
Yes, samples and coupons.
Absolutely. We tried, atypical antipsychotics. We tried SSRIs. We tried SNRIs. We tried all kinds of different things for sleep. And yeah, it was a long journey, but probably I've been on my current cocktail and doses for about 4 years now.
Yes.
So it took a long time really to find what works well. There were, periods of time where something would work well for 6 months to a year.
Yes.
But sometimes the dosings would max out and we'd just kind of, run its course there and have to switch to something new.
And you and I talk to patients all the time who are frustrated with their medications.
Yeah.
That's why they come see us for a ketamine clinic, and we claim that we're not there for cure, we're et cetera, et cetera. We don't promise them that they're going to be able to ever come off their pills, their oral pills. They still need to see their psychiatrist. And the patients that you had is atypical, as you know. Most people, after several rounds of medicines, will stop showing up for their appointments or stop refilling their medicines.
Sure.
Cancel, not make an appointment on the way out the door for follow-up, or cancel their appointments, and they're kind of lost to follow-up until things come to a head again, oftentimes months to years later. But you were stuck. What do you think? What do you think played into your sticking it out for so long until you got on a regimen that seemed to work for you?
I mean, I think it was a couple of things, but the first part was just my personality. I'm a rule follower and a perfectionist. And
Yes.
if an authority figure tells me to do something, I'm going to do it. Also, I was really afraid of what I might be capable of if I was completely unmedicated. I didn't want to. The alternative was worse, right?
Yes.
So I just made a commitment that I'm going to take my medicine every single day as it's prescribed. And, I really trusted my doctor that he was going to listen to me.
Yes.
And that he would, because he knew that I was compliant and that I showed up to my appointments, that I could be honest with him about side effects and if I felt it was working.
Right.
And because we had that trust built up, he would make adjustments based on what I reported back to him because he could trust that I was doing everything else in my power,
How long would you live with the side effect? Would you stop a medicine then call him? Would you wait until the next office was? How long would you live with because I think all these are, you're an ideal patient. Number one, which is too bad you have to be a patient. Number two, since you are a patient, you're an ideal patient. And any physician would love to have somebody like you who'd stick out for months to years for medication adjustments.
It's funny, and I'm the perfect mental health patient.
Well, good. We'll take it. You're still, as you heard me
Matches my
say,
personality big time.
You're still here.
High achieving.
Yeah, you're still here. So your perfectionism actually works in your favor in this case. Your stick-to-itiveness and grit and perfection works in your favor. How long would you live with a side effect if it gave you dry mouth or blurred vision or whatever?
Sure.
Whatever. What kind of side effects?
I mean, there were certain things that were certainly more tolerable than other things. I think, and there were so many medicines that's hard for me to remember, like what was doing what. I mean, if a medicine was making me vomit, I would pretty much call right away and be like, hey, this isn't working. Right. Sometimes changing the time of day or taking with food or not with food would help with that. I remember getting pretty bad akathisia from a couple of things, and that's, shaking, tremors, basically.
So let's make sure. Yeah, sometimes it's a horrific side effect, and sometimes it can become permanent in some people, even if they stop their medicines.
Right.
Akathisia can happen with or without medicines, but certainly it happens most commonly in psychotropic medicines. Antidepressants, and antipsychotics are the big ones, it's a terrible feeling. It's like restless legs all over your body.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you got the EBGBs, creepy crawlies all over your arms, your torso, your legs. You got to stand up and pace.
Yes.
These people are miserable. They can't even sleep sometimes because they got the EBGBs inside.
Right.
But anyway,
And I was on a medication for a little while that caused that, but we kind of dialed in the dose to where it would keep it in line. And I remember going, see my psychiatrist like every 4 weeks or so, and he would test and see what the akathisia was like. So he was very fastidious that way. So, I mean, there were other things that I could just sort of deal with. Excessive sweating was definitely a common side effect.
You had weight gain, if I remember correctly.
So I started something called Seroquel, which I'm actually still on. But at that time, I was on a pretty good dose of it, a pretty kicking dose. And in I'd say maybe over the course of like 2 or 3 months, I think I put on 40 to 50 pounds.
That's
it was a dramatic gain.
Yes.
And that was one I honestly didn't realize how much it was. I wasn't in the habit of weighing myself regularly, but I knew that my clothes weren't fitting right. And so I think I saw him maybe like once or twice over the course of that time period. And I had finally I weighed myself. Actually, I think I weighed myself when I came into the clinic for the first time. And realized like what the number was. And I was like, whoa.
Yes.
We need to talk about this. And so honestly, coming down to a very low dose and then coming off of that for a while, I mean, it was dramatic the way it affected my metabolism pretty much bounced back.
Good. Not everybody's does, as you know.
Yeah.
It's not
it
the
took
medicine.
work, but I was able to lose some of the weight, Yeah.
And I'll travel all the way kind of closer to the time you started ketamine. Why did you start ketamine back in 2017?
Yeah, so let's see. So I had a really hard time like right out of high school. Had a scholarship to the school of my dreams and went there for a year and had a complete meltdown. It was out of state and everything and had to come home.
The meltdown was depression or anxiety or panic?
Depression, suicidality, actually. And so I was inpatient for a little while then.
I see, yes.
And so when I came back home to St. Louis and I was seeing my psychiatrist again, he was like, I really think you have bipolar. And so that's when I got a bipolar type 2 diagnosis. So that means that I tend more towards hypomanic and depressive episodes. I don't have super high manias where I'm, talking a mile a minute and risky behavior, some of those more stereotypical things. My mania is more of a hypo, so kind of like a medium level where I would just not need very much sleep, accomplishing a lot, committing to new projects, all that kind of stuff.
People like to be hypomanic.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. But with me, it came with an inevitable nosedive crash.
To not just to normalcy, to depression.
Yeah, to depression and suicidality for sure. Yeah, that was persistent.
And that's important to talk about to people. whenever people are bipolar, manic depression is the old term, oftentimes they only present with depression. That's only,
Right.
for years, that's the only time we'd see them or hear about them.
Because you spend
is
so
whenever-
much more time
Right.
in depression
That's right.
than in those other phases. Yeah.
So some people are manic for days to weeks to months at a time, and we don't hear from them because they're having a good time.
Yeah.
I call it extra energy that gets you into trouble, but sometimes it's not that much trouble. You're spending money or hypersexual, you're meeting people and that you don't know their names and having sex with them or buying stuff. So that's manicky. That's sometimes more bipolar type 1, but we can see bipolar type 2.
Sure.
But the problem is for years we'll miss a manic episode or several manic episodes until we hear from the patient or witness it with the patient
Right.
or hear from their relatives. But it's actually, like you said, don't need much sleep. It's not that you can't sleep. You don't need much sleep because lots of things are bouncing around your head. How to lose weight and start a company and
Yeah.
go back to
Yeah.
school and get married.
Right.
All these things are just kind of popping in your head all the time. There's so much coming out of your head that you practically have to make notes. So many great ideas are
Yeah.
coming out of your head and stuff like that. But the problem is that exactly you said, it doesn't go back to normal. You go back to depression and sometimes suicidality and can't get out of bed.
So I was having these like yo-yo cycles basically for after I returned from college, like 19 to 26 or so basically when I came for ketamine, where I would have, several months of kind of hypomanic energy where I would get a new job and then I would work my butt off and become the star of the show and get promotions and take on more hours and take on more responsibilities.
Yes.
And I would be able to sustain that level of work for max 12 months.
Yes.
And then a huge crash would happen and I would need to take either temporary leaves of absence or longer term leaves of absence. And then I would exhaust my leave from the job and then have to resign.
Right.
And so I repeated that pattern 3 or 4 times
It's hard to
in
catch
my
you
early
sometimes.
20s.
Yeah.
It was, and I thought it was just a personal failing,
Right.
that if I could just get it together, eventually I'm going to get it right one of these days.
Yes.
But really was my bipolar was so out of control, and the expectations for high functioning that I had of myself were so
Right.
unrealistic and so unsustainable
Right.
that I was keeping myself trapped in this cycle.
We see this a lot with adult children of alcoholics and other people who are obsessive and perfectionist. Is that they're very people pleasing, high achieving, but they burn out, and it's not because people are asking them to stay late and do extra
Right.
stuff, but they bring it on themselves because they're smart and they're capable and they have energy, and so they're willing to jump in with both feet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you finally said, you couldn't do school. Was you couldn't manage school. You got severely depressed.
Yeah, so I had tried, through those work periods, I was trying to at least, do a couple of classes a semester at community college. So I was able to complete a few, but really kind of right after I got married, basically, I guess it was 26 or 27 when I got married, 27, I guess. And I just decided I can't do this anymore. I
Yo-yoing.
can't work.
Right.
I can't work full time. And it was it was one of those situations where if I was really honest with myself and thought about what it felt like, quitting my job and just taking a break felt like the only
Right.
relief, the
Yeah.
only possible relief.
You just couldn't have a long weekend
I
or
just
vacation.
could, yeah,
Right.
I could never catch back up. I could never
would
feel
not-
like I got a full gulp of air,
Right. And you'd never achieve the same stuff that you were able to before you
Exactly.
crashed, and so you'd not meet your own expectations.
Yeah, exactly. So when I came to the ketamine clinic, I had, recently made that choice, and so was not working, was newly married, was feeling like a total failure.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how significant? I know everybody's varies widely on how people respond to any medicine or any dose of any medicine or combination. How did ketamine affect you, and how could you tell?
I like to describe it to people like it gave me traction. So for years, I just felt like I was just spinning my wheels. And especially during depressive episodes, that I just could not make any forward progress. Like I would try to exercise or try to take a class or try to make art or try to spend time with friends, and I could just it just didn't get me anywhere. And so I was, just stuck with these chronic, persistent, self-hating thoughts, the rumination over my failures, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so ketamine helped me. Over the first couple of infusions, I noticed a difference in my energy level, and was able to get up and accomplish a few things during the day. And then be, kind of after I finished my series, I was starting to just feel like I was getting some positive forward momentum.
So a series of 6 infusions, just to clarify, 6 infusions twice a week for 3 weeks.
Yep.
So it's not very long.
No,
just
it's not
3
very
weeks.
long. Yeah.
So
And I think I did a few boosters after that. So within the next 3 months or so, I think I did a couple of boosters.
Yeah, these are IV boosters of ketamine that we dose according to body weight. Then we go by your symptoms to adjust it after we first start you on a certain dose for body weight. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't, it certainly wasn't it wasn't a silver bullet, and it wasn't like a light switch, where all of a sudden I was cured and I was back to normal and da-da-da-da. But for the first time, I really felt like I was able to start integrating some of the things that I had been working on in therapy for all of these years.
What type of topics or materials or subjects?
Yeah, so not working and doing intensive ketamine treatment, which causes kind of a dissociative experience. Some of those dissociations really helped to gave me an outside perspective on myself and on my life and on my problems, and I kind of came away with it feeling like maybe I'm not the craziest person to ever exist.
Yeah. It's an important, aha moments that are rare.
And, maybe I can have some sort of happiness in my life and get in control of this in some way, So one of the biggest changes for me was being able to really examine my expectations of myself. I had a lot of unpacking to do in figuring out which of those expectations I needed to keep and which ones I needed to let go.
Good point.
And there were a lot that I needed to let go.
Yes.
And
by the way, nobody could tell you this because you would be weak if you took their advice and let go of certain goals or certain projects.
Right.
You'd be the weak one.
Exactly. The other person giving me permission to let go of an expectation would just be them giving me a break.
Right.
I had to give myself permission.
Yes, you saw yourself differently.
Right.
Right.
And so, some of those things were just the intense perfectionism,
Yes.
Obviously, working full time for a corporation and being in leadership and commanding a high income or whatever, I decided to unassign that from my list of must-haves in my life.
Yes.
And I decided to to say that just also to reframe my expectations away from achievement and more towards purpose and value.
Ah, very important.
And so, some of those differences are so subtle and it can take a long time to really identify, but
That's right.
there were a lot of expectations that I had for myself and for my marriage and for my life that I realized were kind of assigned to me through the church or through my upbringing.
That's right. All of us, by the way, not just you, but all of us have that version of that. Yes.
Absolutely. So I had to really look at those and decide which ones of those were worth keeping and which ones are going to serve me. And so the ones that I still hang on to are, compassion and grace and service to other people and love towards other people. I still very much expect myself to uphold those values.
Yes. By the way, if people notice, you named everything not about yourself, not about extra muscle mass or anything like that. You named about stuff that's external to you that helps with you in terms of relationships.
Yeah. Oh,
So
for sure.
every one of those that you just named are positive relationship traits or goals.
Yeah. One of the beautiful things about being raised in this church community is that like there was a super strong focus on community and relationships.
Yes.
So I learned from a really young age to have deep conversations with people, to be open about my life,
Yes.
to be reflective, and to encourage other people with words. So strong relationships were a really, really important thing to me all the way through.
And that's a lot of people feel like they have to dump their family, dump their faith, et cetera, in order to survive, in order to flourish, in order to heal. And you were able to turn it in your technique, your way, into lots of positive traits that you continue to carry today. And so that's not always. It can't always happen that way for a lot of people. Sometimes they have to cut the umbilical cord to whatever that was attached to that was difficult in their childhood, their youth, or stuff like that. So you're doing well today.
I am doing well today.
And God bless your husband because he waded through quite a bit of this with you.
He really did. He stuck it out through a lot. And my parents too.
That's right.
My parents were
the ones that love you from before you were born.
Absolutely. I said earlier that if like finding a great therapist and a great psychiatrist are really important, but also like both of my parents like believed for me and through me that this wasn't always going to dominate my life.
Yes.
Like that there was going to be a time when I could find some peace and integration.
And it's important for people to hear this, that sometimes all you can do is have grace of presence.
Yeah, absolutely.
That your parents didn't prescribe medicines. They didn't do this. They didn't do that for you. But they were present and they listened and they took your word. They took your word for it. They supported you. And it's important because a lot of parents don't understand. They're sometimes so lost. They're for themselves or their kids are so lost. They don't know where to start. Right. They don't know what to say. They don't know where to show up.
Oh, for sure.
You were very responsible in knowing your medicines and following up with your physician. Initially, you were quite young, but then eventually you've been many years an adult. Did your parents get involved? Anybody get involved to make sure you're taking your medicines, making sure that you're making appointments, keeping them? Went in with you to the therapist and stuff to make sure you're saying the right things? Not the right things, but describing what reality was, really away from the doctor's office.
I think early on they were more involved, especially in managing my medications. My mom was really determined to help me become an independent person, So I mean, like in high school, I was booking my own appointments. If I needed to get to a dentist, she had me call to make the dentist appointment. She really wanted me to be independent in that way, and that was. I think I realized too that this was going to be a process that I was going to have to own.
So you said something, and you and I do this a lot when we see the patients. We love all our patients at the ketamine clinic, but we recognize some of them have their own kind of disability that they can't do something without, and something that you and I would think would be reasonable that they have competency to do it, but they haven't done it for such a long time. It's not been done. It's been done for them for such a long time. That's very scary to do anything to make a decision about which doctor, if you want to go to the doctor, if the medicine is helping or not helping, and so your mom did it kind of the way that helps you even today. That you're a strong person today.
Absolutely, I'm grateful that she did because that we see a lot of people who are really impacted by that kind of learned helplessness. It can be a hugely dysfunctional.
Whenever you can't get out of bed, you really have to have people help you.
Yeah,
for the
absolutely.
Most basic. Cook for you, et cetera.
Oh yeah.
But eventually, when you can't get out of bed, part of the healing process and part of becoming an adult, part of the healing process is more independence, more self-respect, self-worth that comes from being able to do stuff for yourself and being able to ask questions and be able to ask for help and obtain help and stick with the help and follow through with the help. Well, wonderful. Is there something I haven't asked that's important to you that you think is important part of your story that our listeners may benefit from, both young and old?
I think I just want to encourage people that are listening to this. Like, I've been very privileged to have incredible resources, incredible family, incredible friends, great doctors, great therapists. A lot of things have gone right for me, you know, to help me end up where I am now. However, I really do think that there is hope for a life beyond just a diagnosis,
Yes.
right? I know how scary it is to hear the words bipolar disorder. It can be scary to hear PTSD or OCD or depression or anxiety disorder. All of those things can be really scary. But there is a tremendous amount of power in learning about yourself.
Yes.
In order to manage difficult emotions, manage difficult things that you go through in your life.
Yes.
In order to turn that into something beautiful that you're proud of,
Yes.
And I feel like I'm lucky now at this point in my life where I'm able to make a lot of meaning out of what I've gone through, creatively, professionally, whatever.
And you help other people because of your story today, but certainly when you do it just a few seconds at a time, when you talk to people, a few minutes at a time in the office, it's a big deal. It's a added value and added hope. I want people to know that that aha moments, insights come a lot of different ways.
Yeah, exactly.
Ketamine is one of them, but people with meditation, with prayer, with exercise, with talk therapy have these insightful periods that are life-altering. We know that if therapists give you the answer, your parents give you the answer, your loved one gives you the answer of what your problem, what you're struggling with, even if you believe them, you tend not to implement it.
Yeah.
And certainly if you implement it, it doesn't tend to stick. You don't tend to follow through. So that self-discovery, accelerated by ketamine in this case, but that self-discovery, and you laid the groundwork, you and your family laid the groundwork for self-discovery because you were open to thinking and open to talking, is an enormous, enormous benefit.
For sure.
It gave you your mindset, your intention was already set well in advance of coming to get ketamine.
Correct.
What a powerful story. Thank you for talking to me one-on-one. I know a lot of people are going to be interested in understanding and listening. They may have questions for us, and they may have comments. Once again, your story and my what I've added does not reflect the entirety of depression or bipolar disease.
Certainly not.
And so this is why people need good primary care practitioners, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, physicians. A lot of them tend to have good amount of experience. It's not enough just to come out of training. You have to have quite a bit of experience to handle something as complicated as this and do it well. Mental health professionals are invaluable, excellent, are invaluable. Some of them are available through telemedicine nowadays if you didn't have somebody located close to you. Insurance is helpful. It's not mandatory. I think you and I have talked about this before.
Yeah.
Insurance smooths the lubricates the tracks so you can get what you need, but you can get reasonable care without insurance on Medicare and Medicaid, et cetera. There's always more to talk about. Thank you for sharing. Anything you and what's our website? What's our website? What's our email?
Yeah, our email address is notyourdocpod@gmail.com. Notyourdocpod@gmail.com. Please send us questions and feedback.
Vanessa, I appreciate everything who you are and everything that you do and bring to our practice, our clinic. Our patients are better for it. And so am I. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tadros. It was an honor.
This previous podcast represents my opinions and the opinions of my guests. This is not medical advice, and I'm not establishing a physician-patient relationship with any listener. The content here should not be taken as medical advice. The content here is for informational purposes only, and because each patient is so unique, please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions that you may have.